Welcome to the Real Comic Heroes Podcast. Your adventure into the world of comic book movies starts here.
Greetings, citizens, and welcome to another adventure of the Real Comic Heroes Podcast. My name is Travis, and today I'm flying solo with a special guest, Ken Knudtsen. Gonna chat with Ken here today and find out about an awesome-sounding thing called My Monkey's Name is Jennifer. And I cannot wait to... I've already got a little bit of the background, but, I mean, with a title like that, you know, you just have to find out more. But Ken, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well.
Where are you based out of?
I'm in Indianapolis. Actually, my co-host and I both are in Indianapolis. But
Nice.
what about you?
I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh, okay. I do another podcast, and my co-host there is in Charlotte, or somewhere in and around North Carolina.
Nice.
Yeah. So, welcome. We're going to talk about your Kickstarter campaign that you're launching for your book. My Monkey's Name is Jennifer, and I definitely want to find out more about that and kind of talk about your history in comics. Kind of where you got started, and just have a good chat. So,
Sounds good, man.
were you a big comic book reader as a kid? Did you grow up reading comics, or?
As far back as I can remember, I've always read comics. I loved it. As a real quick background, I unfortunately grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. So that was an incredibly isolating way to grow up.
Sure.
So for me, with a brother and a sister in a two-bedroom apartment for my whole family, reading and drawing was really the only time I got to myself, and maybe even not that all the time.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, she saw superheroes as a good moral fiber kind of thing to be a part of. So she begrudgingly allowed it because superheroes, at least in the comics that I had shown her, were always doing the right thing and teaching you to do the right thing because it was the right thing.
Sure.
And I remember one day sitting out on the stoop, the neighbor came downstairs, ready to jog. He stopped and sees me, and he's like, "Ken, you read comics?" And I said, "Yes, Mr. Kurt," because I was very polite. And he's like, "Hold on a second." And he ran back upstairs and came down with a whole box full of comics. He's like, "These were mine, these are yours now."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So I feel like everyone who was a comics fan as a kid has a story like that somewhere.
Do you remember any specifics? Like what were you into? What did you read? Were you just like reading anything you could, or were you into one particular, character?
I mean, back then, there weren't, at least where I grew up, there weren't anything close to comic book stores.
Oh,
You had to play your luck at 7-Eleven spinner rack, or when bookstores open up in malls, sometimes they would have a spinner rack, which was twice the amount of spinner racks now you can get to.
Yeah.
But I would grab whatever I could.
Sure.
I remember I was talking with some people last night. I love Aquaman. I loved him as a kid when we would play with the other apartment kids in the field, and we play superheroes. There wasn't a lot of fighting me for when I said I get to be Aquaman today. They're like, yeah, that's fine. But I mean, I loved, like most people, like I loved what were the cartoons at the time too.
Sure.
So like in the 80s, there wasn't really anything new until Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which opened up the whole Marvel universe for me. I'm like, whoa, the X-Men seem kind of cool. But before that was the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, which I loved. The Super Friends, like all those versions of it. Space Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like those early Hanna-Barbera stuff where as an adult you appreciate like, oh, Alex Toth designed all of these? That's amazing.
Uh-huh.
So, basically whatever I can get a hold of.
Was there anything that was off limits? I mean, since you mentioned you grew up Jehovah's Witness, was there anything that got taken away because it was deemed inappropriate, or?
Anything with magic was not allowed.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's why I really never connected with any magic characters, because I just never read them as a kid.
Sure, yeah.
Excessive violence. There was a shockingly adult storyline in West Coast Avengers at one point. West Coast Avengers is my favorite super team in comics because of Hawkeye. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But there's a storyline where everyone was getting thrown around time, and Mockingbird got possessed, and then got raped basically by a Phantom Ranger. And when
Okay.
she came to, there was a fight, and she let him fall off a cliff. And I remember that actually being in the news. And my mom looked, without asking, she looked to see what comics I had. She saw that, and she
Oh,
got furious. She's like, "No comics for you." I'm like, ah.
wow.
I was like, that didn't last too long, but it
Yeah.
still sucked.
Yeah. Yeah. And was this, where were you like living at the time? Was this in North Carolina or was this somewhere else?
No, I'm relatively new to North
Okay.
Carolina. I grew up on Long Island in New York.
Okay.
So, yeah, the suburbs.
Gotcha. So when it came time to creating your own stuff, did writing come first, or was drawing kind of your, or was it both? Were you just creating your own stories and?
I did like short, like a couple of pages here or there with my own stuff. It blew my mind when someone showed me how you get actual comic book scripts, um, and like you go to the library to photocopy them, whatever,
Yeah.
and try and draw from that. Or going to in-store signings, sometimes writers or editors would have like sample scripts to hand out to people.
Okay.
So like that was a very eye-opening thing. Like, oh, this is how it starts. But for me, writing was never the strong suit. It was always drawing because I remember drawing since I could remember.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I write for myself, it's all right. Well, what do I think I want to draw?
Okay. That's pretty cool. That's kind of it's almost kind of the Marvel method of comics. It's kind of like get the image out there first, and then go in later and put the words on the panels.
Yeah, yeah. Except I'm the one that has to figure out the words later on too.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, I learned how to do it much better when a friend of mine, while I was working in a movie theater in high school, he's like, "Hey, you seem to draw pretty well." I go to school visual arts in Manhattan. It's like they teach comic book classes by comic book instructors. If that's something you'd want to look at, I think that would be a fun place for you to go to school. And I'm like, "Oh, that's a thing. I didn't know."
Sure.
Thanks, public high school, for not being useful. My guidance counselor lost my file every year, and every year he was shocked at how well I was doing.
Right.
But yeah, I went to SVA. My instructors were Klaus Janson, Walt Simonson, John Ruggieri, Jack Potter. I got to have one class with Joe Orlando before he passed.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to take as big advantage of it as I could,
Yeah.
and just absorb everything I could.
I was going to ask later, what the Klaus Janson and Walt Simonson connection was in relation to your Kickstarter, but now that makes a little bit more sense. I assumed it was more of a meeting them at conventions and that sort of thing, but I mean that's amazing that you got to learn from them. I mean, I remember going to, I think it was in '96, going to a comic book kiosk in a mall. And I bought the 10th anniversary of The Dark Knight Returns, and just seeing the spine, in those thick blocky letters that said Miller and Jansen, I think maybe Varley as well. Like that, I'll just always remember seeing that name and then learning about Klaus's work and that, and then kind of connecting Klaus with Frank Miller's other stuff, Daredevil, and I'm not sure about Sin City. I don't know if they worked together on that or not, but
They did not. I think that was all Frank. Yeah.
okay. And then of course, Walt Simonson, his time on like Thor is, kind of the almost the standard, I think, in like Thor, runs.
Oh, I definitely agree that Walt's Thor is like that high watermark.
So how did you? I know that Jennifer kind of started in 2002. Was there anything kind of before that getting into comics? How did you? What took you into getting into comics?
I mean, in high school, I was in all the super smart classes. I ended up taking 10 AP classes in high school, and 8 of them got accepted, which was great because that meant at SVA I started off with 32 credits, which meant I was at the front of the line every year to register for classes. So that meant between that and not having to take most humanity classes, I got in on Klaus's class early. I got in Walt's class early. I got to take them multiple times. So unfortunately, like for most situations, a good chunk of the classes didn't put the effort in. And as it got closer and closer to graduation, less and less people were putting their stuff on the wall to be critiqued. So Walt, Klaus, all the other teachers, like they pick up on that stuff. And if you're willing to put the work in, they're willing to put the work in terms of critiquing, making suggestions, uh, offering their services, and whether it's drawing something or an introduction. So they were super helpful in letting me think that this is something I could do. What didn't was super helpful was Marvel declared bankruptcy like one of like 8 times after I graduated.
Sure.
So a
Yeah.
couple of buddies and I were maybe we'll do our own stuff.
Were companies like Image or going to DC, were those are those thoughts you had of going somewhere else or?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
What happened though was the bankruptcy was so crippling to Marvel at that time. I
Oh,
can't remember which time it was and who bought them.
right.
That professional artists that had been working there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years were getting dropped and then scrambling to DC
Sure.
Valiant.
Yeah.
Trying to think who else was there.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And at that time, Image wasn't really looking to
Mm.
bring in non-big name people, with the exception of Rob Liefeld, who hired whoever he could see. I remember that just because I saw a recent Image documentary on Netflix.
Mm.
And he's like, yeah, I was going to conventions and just hiring every good artist. And then I had to find a way to pay them. I'm like, yeah, that's what business is. But yeah, like doing stuff like that, there were some really small independent publisher guys that were giving us work, and we were getting paid honestly more than we should have been getting paid for it. But that was nice practice and an introduction into the industry too.
Was this SLG
No,
or did that come later? Okay.
That came later. Yeah, I mean, this was a guy who I found. A couple of us found off the job board at the college, and he was just really hungry to try and put out stuff. And I mean, the stories weren't really good. I think I would like to say I'm a better artist now than I was back then.
Okay.
But I mean, it was very instructive to see how you can manage deadlines with things like going to school and working full time and having to commute all on the same thing. That's something that helps out basically with everything else in life too.
Yeah. So I have to know, where does Jennifer come from? Where does, this book, this idea, where did that come from?
Well, my friends and I were talking about our own comics. I had nothing. So I slogged back to Long Island and I dropped down in front of the TV a little bummed. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And the best Simpsons episode ever came on. It was the one with Mojo, the helper monkey.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a monkey comic. I'm like, what will he do? Like, he'll be angry. Like, why will he be angry? And that's how I started formulating the characters in the storyline.
Yeah.
And one of the classes at SVA was writing for comics. So for a room full of people that have never written a script before, they broke it down to really basic blocks. And as someone who's very structured in my head, I've really latched onto that. So I did character bios. I did loose timelines. I filled in the blanks for all that stuff. So by the time I got to actually sit down and draw, I want to say I had a general outline for what ended up being 6 issues. I had a full script for 2 because I really wanted to get all of that done and not have to worry about missing steps later on. That was going to just like kill the whole thing.
Sure. And then how do you get, I guess, that early process in getting your book printed even? Like, how do you take that step? Like going from script to finished art to getting it made?
That was very anxiety inducing, I'll be honest. Yeah. At the time, like, you could go to conventions and show to people and possibly get picked up. But like, I had never been out of the tri-state area in terms of comic conventions. So my friend Jerry Ma, who just had his Kickstarter successfully done like 36 hours a couple months ago, this was our first time going to San Diego. And when I got there, I'm lugging my portfolio around, which had 20 pages of a monkey comic in it, and I didn't know what to expect.
Sure.
I was thinking like I really wasn't too clicked in on the indie comic scene at the time, like how big it was. So I'm like, I'm in a superhero convention with a book about a little girl and an angry monkey. What am I doing?
Right.
And that got worse when I showed it to 4 people because, we're on New York time. We're ready to go. So that Thursday evening, I showed it to 4 people, and each of them said, I think I've seen this before, but I don't know where. And they kind of just closed the book. And now I'm thinking, all right, this is so much worse because there's already someone with a little girl in a monkey comic walking around.
Right.
Until the fifth guy I talked to, he's like, oh, this is the thing Peter David reviewed. Because a month before that, I went to a New York comic convention, and I love Peter David stuff, man.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
Aquaman, the Hulk, X Factor, Spidey 2099. So like I really like his stuff. And when I got to his table, he was packing up because I don't think he was feeling well, but like he wasn't fully packed up yet.
Yeah.
So I walked over, and then for anyone listening, the best thing you can do when you're walking through a convention, even now, is have whatever bag you have with you full of photocopies of your work with your contact information on the front of every page to hand out to whoever you think might like it or whoever's work you like. So when I saw Peter there, I introduced myself. I said, Mr. David, I'm a huge fan of yours. This is my book. I gave him the quick pitch. And I said, if you could look at this and give me any feedback, I'd really appreciate it. And the first thing he asked was, is your contact information on this? I'm like, every page, yes. He's like, okay, I'm leaving now, but I will get a hold of you. And what happened was he didn't get a hold of me, but he was writing a weekly column for Comics Buyer's Guide, and they asked him to review things for San Diego. So we reviewed a movie, a TV show, and a newspaper strip, and my comic.
Oh,
and
wow.
he ran the first 3 panels on the top of the page. That's what everyone saw.
Nice.
Yeah. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah.
A little too excited maybe that night because there was a little battle damage the next morning.
Sure. Yeah.
So SLG Publishing was one of the companies I had on my list to look at. And for everyone listening, again, like it helps. Whatever prep work you can do for conventions is the best. Look to see who's going to be there. Look where they are so you can hit people in the same area-ish.
Sure.
And not be running ragged. So when I showed up at SLG, it was bigger than I thought it was. You know, I took a couple laps around. Super huge variance in art styles and stories. So I was kind of lingering around, and the one person that wasn't talking to someone, he's like, hey, can I help you? And I said, yeah, do you have any submission guidelines? Because every company has a different kind of guideline.
Okay.
Whether it's creator-owned or established characters, whatever it is. So you always ask for a submission guideline. It's like, well, I'm the guy that owns it. I'm Dan Vado. Like, I'm going to look at it at some point.
Yeah.
So I hand him the portfolio, and he immediately starts laughing because Dan likes monkeys.
Oh, good. Nice.
Yeah. So, he asked me for the handout, the packet. And he's like, so here's the address for the location. He's like, you're going to mail this to me in 2 months because we're going to lose half of everything people hand to us. That's just,
wow.
That's logistics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's some things to have ready to have an idea, like timeline wise, where you're at, what you want to do. And we'll talk in 2 months. And
that's awesome.
We talked in 2 months after I sent him the thing, and I followed up. Something that's cool about Dan and everyone at SLG, like they've done this before with people that are doing it all themselves and have a full-time job. So they asked all the right questions to make sure I didn't burn myself out.
Yeah.
And that's just to start. They set up a ton of interviews. Thanks to them, I got into Wizard, which is pretty crazy. I was a featured thing in previews, and even with all the prep work I did and what they helped me with, I just made the last deadline for the 6th issue because that was during Christmas season. I was working retail full time, and I just crashed for like 2 weeks. I couldn't draw.
Yeah.
But I got it done. They were super psyched about it. They were really good at promoting it to comic book stores, especially past the 2nd issue, because usually that's when orders drop. Like, all right, if it's going to go any longer, you'll probably collect it. So.
Oh, right. Huh.
But yeah, like I was really fortunate that Dan and his team really, really worked to help me out.
Yeah. No, that's great. And especially great that he didn't just take it from you right then and there, knowing that he might lose it in the packing up process and getting back to their home base and all that. So that's awesome that he liked it enough to say, don't give it to me just yet. Here's how and when to send it our way. That's really cool.
Exactly. And as a nice surprise too, when they mailed out the contract to sign, it was in language that a normal person can understand.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it was super good for the artist too.
Might be a weird question. Does a contract come over when you're the writer and artist? Do you get 2 contracts, or is it one contract with the language that spells it out for you to do both? I don't know if it's
The second thing,
Okay.
especially for like SLG, where they're used to dealing with one-person teams,
Oh, sure.
basically.
Yeah.
But if there were two people, it's very clear that, like most contracts, they list one or whoever who's involved in the project first, and then in parentheses, it's like to be referred to as "quote unquote" the creator.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about some of your other work. I found, I went through and found that you did some Wolverine work for Marvel as part of like their like a Valentine's Day series of short stories.
Yeah,
It took me a minute to like, I was like, because it was all over the easy to find online as far as like it's in this one collected volume of some Wolverine work that they're putting out. I was like, well, that's like, where did it originate? What issue did it come from? I did find it in the Marvel Unlimited app, and it's part of the I Heart Marvel like series.
yeah.
But I read this Wolverine story that you did. Like it was this really cool short story, and what I really loved about it was your use of like silhouettes in your artwork, in the foreground and the background, the way you'd outline a character to set him apart from kind of what else was going on, and it just added to like this noir story that was being told. And then I think you get to like the last page, or second to last page, and there's Wolverine standing there in like the classic yellow and blue costume that it shouldn't work because it is like this noir, dark, moody story that you'd expect to see him in the his jeans and his flannel shirt and cowboy hat, like, or something like that. But you've got him in the bright colors, but it really shouldn't work, but it does. Was really, I don't know, really like that for some reason. So it's a cool little story, and yeah.
Yeah, that was cool because the writer Dan Way at the time, he was writing Wolverine, and he was looking to branch out with his agent to do some creator-owned stuff. So through some conventions and some mutual people, he hooked up with me, and the story he wanted to do was pretty cool. It was, I think, similar sense of humor.
Yeah.
He pointed out a couple of things he loved in Jennifer that were interesting observations. Like he really loved that the little girl looked like a little girl,
sure,
from the beginning to end. Like it looked like the same little girl, and he's like, not every comic artist can draw kids.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, yeah, I did a lot of sketching for kids to see how they move their weird shaped heads. Yeah.
Well, I also I really like that your Wolverine, it's not Hugh Jackman. He's it makes a lot of sense that you spend a lot of time drawing a furry little ape when you look at this Wolverine, and he's not the GQ Hugh Jackman type. He's the runt, as was always known as before. Now he's a little bit more, I don't know,
average height.
Yeah, a little average. He's always, fairly good looking, but I like this Wolverine. He's just dirty, so I like that.
I mean, I love the Kent Williams Wolverine and Meltdown.
Okay. Yeah.
So like that's where I take it. Like he's always hunched over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like angry posture.
Yeah.
He's almost like a shaved gorilla. Like his arms are so big and a little too long. Yeah. So I'm glad you like that. Like the style that I drew that in.
I was also like on your website and just kind of looking through some of your artwork, and I think you've got some John Wick like artwork, and then just some other different stuff. And then I was wondering, like, by chance, are you a fan of James Bond?
Daniel Craig ones, yes.
Okay. I asked because I had been reading some of the Dynamite comics, like some of their like newer James Bond comics, and I just get a real vibe like looking through that artwork on your website. I think you've got the right like look for some kind of James Bond story with the pops of color, like the 60s, bright pops of color that's in some of your stuff on your website, and like images of fights and violence and stuff like that, and then your use of silhouettes. Like there's something there that I think would really work for a noir, detective story with Bond. So, Dynamite Comics, hey, give Ken a call.
I would love that, especially drawing. Like, I love drawing backgrounds. I love drawing establishing shots. I love drawing city, like especially alleys.
It shows,
with shadows and stuff like that you were just saying. Like, I love all of that. So yeah, I would very much like to do a James Bond series.
You heard it here first. Well, let's talk about your Kickstarter and kind of what you hope to accomplish, what is kind of going to be included in it. What I know you're putting together the original 6 issues. What else are you putting in there with it?
Well, I mean, with the Kickstarter, the basic stuff is it's coming out September 13th. It'll be going for a month. I forget how much money I'm asking for, so I hope I get it.
Yeah.
But it's the first 6 issues. It is the second graphic novel, because we jumped straight to graphic novel for the second round of stories. There are a bunch of short stories in between and a couple of things that I still have, so I was able to scan it in and put it in for this. It's going to clock in at just over 200 pages, I think.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's out of print currently, so I'm really psyched to have it as a physical thing again. I made some decisions in terms of, because I'm a big Cliff Chang fan, and his Paper Girls graphic novel, I'm friends with him and Jared, the letterer designer, and the only panel I've ever gotten to was one about that Jared was one of the top guys for, that was production for comics, and they talked about how they spent hours touching paper, figuring out whether they wanted matte or gloss for the cover, how big it was, because a lot of companies started printing smaller sizes, which I'm not really a fan of.
Yeah.
So like, there's a lot of different things I want to try and do with this to make me really happy to have it in my hands, and hopefully make everyone else happy. For like all the rewards and stuff, there's original art. Unfortunately, not Jennifer pages, because I don't ever want to give those up.
Sure.
But some of the John Wick stuff is available. You may have noticed that I enjoy Keanu Reeves movies a lot.
Yeah.
So like, those were super fun to do. I did some new drawings for Jennifer for the Kickstarter that will be in the book. Commissions. There'll be a limited edition print, like all that stuff. But not going so overboard where you're drowning in like all these tiny little things that you're going to throw away the second you get it, if you get it. Yeah. I really don't like that in terms of Kickstarters, and the ones I've supported, not shockingly, tend to stay away from that.
Sure.
But I have made a bunch of fun videos with a stuffed animal dressed up as Jennifer that I think people will like, to help promote it.
I really like your Kickstarter video with the just like 4 sequences of Jennifer just screaming. Really cool.
Yeah, and all the stuff in there is pretty much from the comics too.
Yeah. My
buddy David came over and he took my very slim idea and he's like, all right, we're going to roll this out. Now it's a beach. I'm like, oh, I'll make a pirate hat. This is awesome.
Well, I don't really have any other questions, but yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the Kickstarter to launch, and I'll definitely be there to help support it, and I hope some of our listeners, join in and help you get this thing, to where you want it to be. And sounds like we'll have some cool rewards for that. So, is there anything else you want to talk about with any of this, or anything you want to, add or share?
I think you covered pretty much everything. So thank you. And again, thank you, Travis, for having me on.
Oh no, my pleasure.
Yeah, this is a very relaxing and cool environment that you had here for me. Once Discord let me go back on.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Tell everyone where they can find your stuff. I'll include all your links and everything in the show notes, so you don't have to plug everything. But if you want to send people, Instagram, Twitter, wherever.
All social media stuff is my name, so it's KENKNUDTSEN. Hopefully, autofill will get me there showing up before you have to get through the whole name.
Yeah.
My website's simple. It's myname.com. And I'll have links up starting Monday, because that'll be a week ahead of time for the Kickstarter campaign, because they have that cool function where if it's not launched yet and the person allows it, you can click on it so they can let you know when it is on.
Okay.
And then we'll get all the millions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously.
And James Bond. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely want to make that happen. Well, I don't have any more questions, and I look forward to the Kickstarter and kind of seeing how that goes, and I wish you all the best. But I think that'll do it for now.
Thank you. It's my first Kickstarter, so hopefully most of it works all right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, until next time, stay safe out there, citizens.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Find the show on Facebook and Twitter at Real Comic Heroes. All music and audio are the property of their respective creators.